The Windsor Hotel, New York City, 1899. The gilded lobby gleams in golden light as guests in finery laugh and sip champagne. A fire smolders behind a decorative wall. Moments later, flames burst through the building's seams. Screams echo. The grandest hotel in America has become a death trap. As panic rises, the unimaginable happens. No fire alarms, no sprinklers, no exits wide enough for escape. Over 40 people die, yet the hotel is rebuilt, even grander. The same story will play out again and again across the country. In an age of unparalleled luxury, why did so many of America's grandest hotels burn to the ground? The grand vision of luxury. The allure of the Grand Hotel was irresistible, a place where power, beauty, and exclusivity merged into an almost mystical force. In 1870, America stood at a crossroads. The Civil War had ended. Railroads stretched across the continent. Fortunes multiplied overnight. And the wealthy wanted somewhere to spend their money. Not just anywhere, somewhere magnificent. The Grand Hotel answered that hunger. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a stage, a temple, a declaration that you had arrived. Before the Grand Hotel, travelers stayed in boarding houses or cramped inns, shared rooms, shared beds sometimes. The facilities were primitive. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. But as America's industrial machine roared to life, a new class emerged. Millionaires, industrialists, railroad barons. They demanded something better. The first grand hotels rose in cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The Tremont House in Boston opened in 1829. It featured private rooms, indoor plumbing, and gas lighting. Revolutionary for its time. But this was just the beginning. By the 1880s, the race was on. Every major city wanted the most spectacular hotel on the continent. Architects competed to design structures that defied imagination. Hotel owners commissioned buildings that stretched 6, 7, 8 stories into the sky. They wanted lobbies that sparkled with crystal chandeliers, dining rooms paneled in imported mahogany, ballrooms that could host 500 guests beneath ceilings painted by European masters. The Gilded Age had arrived, and the Grand Hotel became its cathedral. These buildings weren't constructed for comfort alone. They were monuments to aspiration. Walking through the doors meant stepping into a different world, a world where marble columns rose like ancient Greek temples, where gold leaf covered every surface that mattered, where velvet curtains hung heavy and thick, blocking out the dirty streets below. The wealthy obsessed over these details. They demanded perfection, not just in the public spaces, but in their private suites. 4 poster beds carved from walnut, Persian rugs worth more than a working man's annual salary, wardrobes large enough to hold 50 gowns, bathtubs made of porcelain, fed by hot water pipes that seemed like pure magic. Architects understood what their clients wanted. They delivered beauty. They delivered grandeur. They delivered excess. But they delivered something else too, something invisible, something deadly. No one talked about fire codes. They didn't exist yet. No one worried about escape routes. The guests were too busy marveling at the frescoed ceilings. No one questioned whether wooden beams wrapped in silk wallpaper might be dangerous. It looked too beautiful to be wrong. The Grand Hotel became a living organism. It breathed ambition. It pulsed with desire. It hungered for recognition. And like all living things driven by hunger, it would eventually consume what fed it. By 1890, hotels across America competed in a silent war of magnificence. The Palmer House in Chicago, the Waldorf in New York, the Palace in San Francisco, each one grander than the last. each one pushing the boundaries of what seemed possible. Fortunes poured into these projects. Millions of dollars vanished into foundations, into facades, into furnishings. Investors saw gold mines. Hotel owners saw legacies. Architects saw immortality. Nobody saw the trap they were building. The dream was simple and seductive. Create a space so beautiful, so exclusive, so perfect that the richest people in America would pay any price to stay there. Make it the place where deals happened, where marriages were arranged, where power was displayed and consolidated. And for a time, the dream worked. The hotels rose, the guests came, the money flowed. America's elite found their temples, and they worshipped at the altar of luxury. But every temple demands sacrifice, and these temples would demand more than anyone imagined: beauty at any cost. Behind every breathtaking chandelier and gold-plated column lay a dangerous secret: wooden beams, velvet curtains, and no fire codes. The architects knew wood. They understood its properties: strong enough to support floors, flexible enough to withstand settling, cheap enough to use in vast quantities, and beautiful when carved and polished properly. Wood became the skeleton of America's grand hotels: floor joists, ceiling supports, wall studs, staircase frames, all hidden behind plaster and paint and wallpaper. Invisible to the guests who never thought to ask what held up the chandeliers above their heads. But wood had another property: it burned. In 1895, the average Grand Hotel contained more flammable material than a warehouse full of kindling. Silk draperies hung from every window. Velvet curtains divided private dining rooms. Oriental rugs covered every floor. Upholstered furniture filled every corner. And connecting it all, wooden floors, wooden walls, wooden ceilings hidden beneath decorative plaster. The hotel was a tinderbox wrapped in gold leaf. Hotel owners knew this. Architects knew this. City officials knew this. Everyone knew. Nobody cared enough to stop it. The problem was simple. Safety looked ugly, fire-resistant. Materials meant iron and brick and concrete. They meant industrial aesthetics, factory architecture, prison design. Everything the wealthy were trying to escape when they walked through those gilded doors. Wealthy patrons made their preferences clear. They didn't want to see sprinkler pipes hanging from ornate ceilings. They didn't want fire escapes marring the elegant facades. They didn't want their experience interrupted by practical concerns like survival. One hotel owner in New York received a proposal for a sprinkler system in 1892. The cost was $8,000. The owner refused. Not because of the expense, because the pipes would be visible in certain corridors, because guests had complained about the industrial look, because beauty trumped safety. That hotel burned 3 years later. 14 people died. The pattern repeated across the country. Architects proposed fire doors. Hotel owners rejected them because they broke the visual flow. Engineers suggested wider hallways for emergency exits. Investors refused because it reduced the number of profitable rooms. Fire marshals recommended removing some of the decorative woodwork. Wealthy patrons threatened to stay elsewhere. In every negotiation between safety and beauty, beauty won. Building codes existed in some cities by the 1890s, but they were weak, full of loopholes, easily circumvented, and in many cases openly ignored. Inspectors could be bought. $100 here, $500 there. Enough to look the other way when wooden interior walls were installed instead of brick. Enough to approve buildings that violated the minimal standards that did exist. Bribery was standard practice. One Chicago building inspector testified in 1898 that he received payments from 15 different hotels in a single year. The total came to $4,300. His annual salary was $1,200. He wasn't unusual, he was typical. But bribery wasn't always necessary. Many cities had no real enforcement mechanism. Inspectors could issue violations, they could write reports, they could recommend changes, but they couldn't force compliance. Hotel owners simply ignored the warnings and opened for business. The economic incentives pointed one direction only. A grand hotel cost between $1 and $5 million to build. Every month of delay meant lost revenue. Every safety feature meant higher costs. Every compromise with beauty meant reduced prestige, and prestige was everything. Hotels competed on luxury, not longevity. They advertised their crystal chandeliers, not their fire exits. They promoted their imported marble, not their sprinkler systems, because that's what guests wanted to hear. The guests themselves became complicit in the danger. They demanded rooms with heavy draperies to block morning light. They insisted on thick carpets to muffle sound from adjoining rooms. They wanted oil lamps and candles to create romantic ambiance, even after electric lighting became available. Every amenity increased the fuel load. Every decoration added kindling. Every luxury brought the building closer to its inevitable fate. Materials science wasn't a mystery. Engineers in the 1890s understood fire resistance. They knew brick didn't burn. They knew iron could withstand heat. They knew concrete provided excellent protection. These materials were available. They were affordable. They were simply unwanted. The aesthetic language of the era left no room for industrial honesty. Beauty meant concealment. Elegance meant hiding the functional bones of the building. Luxury meant pretending the structure existed by magic rather than engineering. So the hotels rose with wooden frames wrapped in plaster, with gas lines running through hollow walls, with electrical wiring installed without proper insulation, with heating systems that placed hot pipes next to combustible materials. They rose as bombs waiting for a spark, building America's temples to excess. In cities across the country, the largest, most beautiful hotels in the world rose into the sky, each more magnificent than the last. The Windsor Hotel opened in New York City on March 30th, 1873. It occupied the entire block on Fifth Avenue between 46th and 47th Streets. 6 stories tall, 400 rooms, a dining room that seated 600 guests. The cost of construction, $2,500,000. At the time, it was the most expensive hotel ever built in America. The exterior featured French Renaissance architecture, mansard roofs, ornate cornices, balconies with wrought iron railings on every floor. The facade used Philadelphia pressed brick with brownstone trim. It looked like a palace transplanted from Paris. Inside, the lobby stretched 120 feet long. Marble floors reflected light from 3 massive chandeliers. Each chandelier held 60 gas jets. The ceiling rose 30 feet overhead, covered in decorative plasterwork painted with scenes from Greek mythology. Columns of Italian marble lined the space, 12 feet in circumference. The Windsor became the hotel of choice for presidents and industrialists. Ulysses S. Grant stayed there. William Vanderbilt maintained a permanent suite. European royalty visited. Opera singers performed in the private ballroom. It represented everything the Gilded Age aspired to be. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Iroquois Theater was under construction. Opened in November 1903, it wasn't technically a hotel, but it followed the same philosophy. beauty above all. The theater seated 1,700 people, advertised as absolutely fireproof, mahogany woodwork, marble staircases, velvet seats, electric lights, the finest theater in the Midwest. The architect, Benjamin Marshall, created 60 emergency exits, but 30 of them were concealed behind decorative panels. Others opened inward instead of outward. Several were locked to prevent non-paying customers from sneaking inside. The vents above the stage were painted shut. The fire curtain was made of wood covered in asbestos fabric, but the mechanism to lower it didn't work properly. Every safety feature had been compromised in the name of aesthetics. In San Francisco, the Palace Hotel opened in October 1875. 7 stories, 800 rooms, cost $5 million. Built by William Ralston, a banker who believed San Francisco deserved a hotel to rival anything in Europe. The palace covered an entire city block. The central courtyard featured a carriage entrance where guests could arrive sheltered from rain. The dining room could serve 1,200 people simultaneously. The hotel employed 500 staff members. It had its own artesian wells, providing 30,000 gallons of water daily. The water system was designed partly for luxury, partly for fire protection. The hotel did have fire prevention in mind, more than most. Ralston installed water tanks on the roof. He created a system of pipes throughout the building. He believed the palace was the safest hotel in America. But the water system relied on gravity and manual operation. There were no automatic sprinklers, no alarm system, and beneath the marble and plaster, the structure was still primarily wood. The hotel construction boom continued through the 1880s and 90s. The Waldorf opened in New York in 1893. 13 stories, 500 rooms, another $2 million in construction costs. Within a few years, the adjacent Astoria Hotel opened, and the two were combined into the Waldorf Astoria, creating the largest and most luxurious hotel in the world. The race for height intensified. Hotels pushed toward 10 stories, 12 stories, 15 stories. Each additional floor meant more guests, more revenue, more prestige. But it also meant guests farther from ground level, longer evacuation times, more complex fire protection needs. Technology advanced to enable the vertical expansion. Steel frame construction allowed buildings to rise higher. Elevators made upper floors accessible. Central heating systems replaced individual stoves. Electric lighting eliminated some fire hazards while creating others. But safety technology lagged behind. Fire escapes were often afterthoughts, narrow metal staircases bolted to exterior walls. They were steep, poorly lit, and in winter, covered with ice. Few guests even knew where they were located. Interior design became increasingly elaborate. By 1900, a luxury hotel room wasn't complete without layer upon layer of decoration. Wallpaper over plaster over wood, fabric panels over wallpaper, tapestries hanging over fabric panels, crown molding, chair rails, wainscoting, every surface covered, every joint concealed. The aesthetic demanded concealment of anything industrial or utilitarian. Pipes were boxed in with wood. Electrical conduits were hidden behind walls. Ventilation shafts were covered with decorative grills. The guest should never be reminded that the building was a machine requiring maintenance and infrastructure. Construction costs soared. The finest hotels spent $1,000 to $1,500 per room to furnish and decorate. Multiply that by 400 or 800 rooms. Add the cost of public spaces, kitchens, mechanical systems, and staff quarters. The total investment often exceeded $5 million. That created tremendous financial pressure. The hotels needed to operate at high occupancy to justify the investment. They needed to charge premium rates. They needed to attract the wealthiest clientele, and that meant maintaining an image of absolute luxury at all times. No expense could be spared on visible elegance, but every dollar spent on invisible safety was a dollar that didn't contribute to the hotel's reputation. The equation was simple and brutal. Beauty paid, safety didn't. So they built beautiful buildings, magnificent buildings. Buildings that would become famous not for their luxury, but for their fires. The question wasn't whether these hotels would burn. The question was when. Fireproof. Beauty. The first ignition. When fire struck the Windsor Hotel in 1899, the luxury that had defined it became its death sentence. March 17th, 1899. Morning at the Windsor. The hotel was fully booked. 350 guests occupied rooms throughout the 6 floors. Wealthy families, business travelers, European visitors, all drawn by the hotel's reputation for elegance. The fire started around noon in the linen room on the 3rd floor. A careless match, a discarded cigar. The exact cause was never determined. What mattered was that it started in a room filled with freshly laundered sheets and towels. Thousands of pounds of cotton and linen. Perfect tinder. The flames found the wooden shelving first, then the wooden walls. Within minutes, the fire had spread to the corridor. Thick smoke filled the hallway. The wallpaper ignited. The carpet caught fire. The blaze moved horizontally through the floor, consuming everything in its path. No fire alarm rang. The hotel had none. No sprinklers activated. The hotel had none. No fire doors closed to contain the blaze. The hotel had none. A maid noticed the smoke and screamed. She ran through the corridors, pounding on doors, shouting warnings. Some guests responded quickly. Others didn't hear. Many were at lunch in the dining room on the 1st floor, unaware that the building above them was burning. The fire climbed the interior walls, following wooden studs and hollow spaces created by decorative paneling. It reached the 4th floor within 10 minutes, then the 5th floor, then the 6th. Guests in upper rooms smelled smoke. They opened their doors to investigate. The corridors were already impassable. Flames rolled across ceilings, heat so intense it blistered skin from 20 feet away. They retreated to their rooms, slammed doors, stuffed wet towels under the gaps, opened windows, screamed for help. The Windsor's grand staircase became a chimney. The open design that had seemed so elegant now created a vertical shaft that funneled heat and smoke upward. Fire raced toward the roof with terrifying speed. Guests trapped on upper floors faced an impossible choice: stay in their rooms and hope firefighters arrived in time, or jump. Many jumped. The sidewalks around the Windsor filled with spectators. They watched people appear in windows, watched them wave for help, watched them climb onto window ledges, watched them fall. A woman on the 5th floor dangled from a window frame, her hands slipping on the decorative stonework. The crowd shouted encouragement. Someone tried to position a net. She fell before it could be placed. The sound of her body hitting the pavement silenced the crowd. Man on the 6th floor tied bed sheets together, creating a makeshift rope. He climbed out the window and started descending. The flames burst through the window above him. The sheets caught fire. He dropped 70 feet to his death. Fire brigades arrived within 8 minutes of the first alarm. They connected hoses to hydrants. Water pressure was weak. The streams barely reached the 3rd floor windows, The fire was already on the roof. Firefighters attempted to enter through the main doors. Smoke drove them back. They tried the rear entrances. The corridors were walls of flame. There was no way to reach the upper floors from inside. They raised ladders. The tallest reached only to the 4th floor. People on the 5th and 6th floors remained beyond rescue. The hotel's water system, designed for ordinary use, proved worthless in the fire. The pressure was too low, the pipes too narrow, the pumps not designed for emergency volume. Whatever William Ralston had learned in San Francisco hadn't been applied in New York. The fire consumed the Windsor from the inside out. The wooden interior collapsed floor by floor. The marble lobby disappeared under burning debris. The crystal chandeliers crashed to the ground. The imported furniture turned to ash. 3 hours after the fire started, only the exterior walls remained standing. The interior was a smoking crater. 47 people died, most from jumping, some from smoke inhalation, a few trapped in rooms, their bodies found later in the ruins. The death toll shocked the city. This wasn't a tenement fire killing poor immigrants. This was the Windsor, the finest hotel in New York, where presidents stayed, where the elite gathered, where money was supposed to guarantee safety. An investigation followed. Inspectors examined the wreckage. They found no evidence of fire suppression systems, no sprinklers, no alarms, no fire doors, no compartmentalization, nothing to slow the spread of flames. They found wooden, interior construction throughout the building. They found gas lines that had ruptured in the heat, feeding the fire. They found electrical wiring installed without proper insulation, creating potential ignition sources throughout the structure. The inspector's report listed 14 separate code violations. All of them had existed since the building opened in 1873. None had been corrected. Multiple inspections over 26 years had noted the problems. No enforcement action had ever been taken. When asked why, the building inspector admitted he had been paid to overlook the violations, $400 per year, delivered in cash, standard practice for the era. The hotel's owners expressed shock and grief. They promised to rebuild. They insisted the new Windsor would be completely fireproof. They commissioned architects to design a modern structure with every safety feature available. Within 18 months, a new hotel rose on the same site. 8 stories, steel frame construction, concrete floors, automatic sprinklers throughout, multiple fire escapes, fire doors in every corridor, alarm systems on every floor. It cost $4 million to build, twice the cost of the original Windsor. But the owners believed they had learned the lesson. The public believed it too. The new Windsor opened to great fanfare. Guests returned. The wealthy resumed their patronage. Within a year, the tragedy was largely forgotten. But the lesson wasn't learned. Not really. Because in cities across America, dozens of hotels operated under the same conditions that had killed 47 people at the Windsor. Wooden interiors, no sprinklers, no alarms, no fire doors. They were all waiting for their turn to burn, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Secrets in the smoke. Even after the fire at Windsor, the same mistakes were repeated, and the fires kept coming. December 30th, 1903, Chicago. The Iroquois Theater opened 6 weeks earlier to enormous acclaim. Billed as absolutely fireproof, the finest theater in the Midwest, seating for 1,700. Every seat filled for the holiday matinee performance of Mr. Bluebeard, a musical comedy starring Eddie Foy. The audience was mostly women and children. families enjoying the Christmas season, the wealthy from Chicago's North Side. They sat in plush velvet seats, admiring the ornate interior, waiting for the second act to begin. At 3:15 in the afternoon, a spotlight ignited a muslin curtain on stage. A stagehand tried to extinguish it with a fire extinguisher. The extinguisher was empty. The flames spread to the scenery. Within seconds, the entire stage was ablaze. Eddie Foy stepped forward. He told the audience to stay calm, to exit slowly, to remain in their seats. His voice carried authority. Some people listened. Others panicked and ran. The stage crew tried to lower the asbestos fire curtain. It jammed. Only partially descended, it created a barrier, but not a seal. Wind from open stage doors fed oxygen to the fire. The flames roared into the auditorium. The theater's 60 emergency exits should have emptied the building in minutes, but 30 were concealed behind decorative panels. The audience couldn't find them. Others opened inward, creating crushing bottlenecks as panicked crowds pushed forward. Several were locked from the outside. The main exits on the ground floor worked. Most of the orchestra-level audience escaped. But in the balconies, chaos erupted. Narrow staircases became death traps. People fell. Others trampled them. Bodies piled at doorways. Those behind kept pushing. Those in front suffocated under the weight. Fire escapes on the exterior should have provided secondary egress. But they ended 10 feet above the ground. No ladders connected them to the alley below. People jumped and broke their legs. Others lowered themselves and hung from the bottom rail before dropping. Many missed and died in the fall. An adjacent building stood across the narrow alley. Its windows faced the theater's fire escapes. Workers inside extended ladders and planks, creating improvised bridges. Some people crossed. Others froze in fear. Some fell between the buildings. The fire itself lasted only 15 minutes. The flames consumed the scenery, the curtains, the seats, and everything combustible. Then it burned itself out, having run out of fuel. But 15 minutes was enough. 602 people died, most from crushing and suffocation in the blocked exits, some from smoke inhalation, a few from the fire itself. It was the deadliest single building fire in American history. The aftermath brought investigations, arrests, and trials. The theater's owners were charged with manslaughter. The building inspector was indicted for bribery. The fire marshal was forced to resign. City officials promised comprehensive reforms. But the pattern revealed something darker than negligence. It revealed a system designed to fail. The Iroquois had been inspected and approved just weeks before it opened. Inspectors had noted problems with the exits, with the fire curtain, with the ventilation system. They issued provisional approval anyway, with the understanding that corrections would be made after opening. The corrections were never made. Opening day arrived. The theater filled with paying customers. And nobody stopped it. Money changed hands. Precise amounts were never established, but testimony revealed that the theater's owners paid approximately $3,000 in bribes to various city officials, not to ignore violations, simply to delay enforcement until after the profitable holiday season. $3,000, 602 lives. The fire exposed corruption throughout Chicago's building department. Inspectors routinely accepted payments. Fire marshals approved buildings they knew were dangerous. Politicians protected contributors who owned theaters and hotels. The system functioned perfectly for profiting from risk, perfectly for concealing danger, perfectly for ensuring that when disaster struck, everyone could claim they were just following procedures. Within 6 months, Chicago passed new building codes. requirements for fire-resistant materials, mandatory sprinkler systems, exit doors that opened outward, fire escapes that reached the ground, annual inspections, criminal penalties for violations. Other cities watched and learned. New York updated its codes. Philadelphia followed. Boston strengthened enforcement. Across the country, municipal governments promised that nothing like the Iroquois would ever happen again. But promises meant nothing without enforcement. And enforcement required political will. And political will dissolved when wealthy hotel owners and theater operators pressured city councils to relax requirements, delay implementation, grandfather existing buildings. The fires continued. In 1906, the San Francisco earthquake destroyed the Palace Hotel, but the earthquake didn't kill it. Fire did. The building survived the shaking, but broken gas lines fed flames throughout the structure. The roof tanks provided water for a few hours, then they ran dry. The hotel burned for 3 days. The supposedly fireproof design proved irrelevant when the city's water mains failed. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York killed 146 garment workers. Not a hotel, but the same issues. Locked exits, insufficient fire escapes, owners prioritizing profit over safety. And again, the pattern: tragedy, outrage, promises of reform, gradual return to business as usual. Each disaster followed the same script. Investigators would uncover obvious violations. Officials would express shock. The public would demand action. New regulations would pass. Then the attention would fade. Enforcement would weaken. The next building would rise with the same flaws hidden behind a fresh facade. The problem wasn't knowledge. Engineers understood fire safety. Architects knew how to build safe structures. Materials existed to create fireproof buildings. The problem was incentives. A safe building cost more to construct. It sacrificed aesthetics for function. It reduced profit margins. It made owners and investors uncomfortable. And in the competition for prestige and profit, uncomfortable buildings lost. So the fires kept coming. Not because people didn't know better, because they knew the cost of doing better and decided it wasn't worth paying. The bill would come due eventually, and the price would be measured in lives, not dollars. The deadly equation. If you built something too grand to survive a fire, could you ever truly escape its destruction? December 7th, 1946. Atlanta, Georgia. The Weinkauf Hotel stood 15 stories tall in the heart of downtown. Built in 1913, it advertised itself as absolutely fireproof. The claim wasn't entirely false. The exterior walls were brick. The floor structure was concrete. The building wouldn't collapse in a fire. But fireproof didn't mean safe. The Weinkauf had no fire escapes. Building codes in 1913 didn't require them for fireproof construction. The theory was simple. If the building won't burn down, occupants can wait in their rooms for firefighters to rescue them. The logic seemed sound. On paper. The hotel had no sprinkler system. Too expensive. Too unsightly. Not required by code for existing buildings. The hotel had no fire alarms. Guests could call the front desk if they noticed smoke. That was considered sufficient. The hotel had no fire doors. Open corridors on every floor. No compartmentalization. No way to contain smoke or flames. 3,021 people died in American hotel fires between 1903 and 1946. That number would have seemed impossible in 1870 when the Grand Hotel era began. But the arithmetic was simple. Build hundreds of hotels. Fill them with thousands of guests every night. Ignore safety requirements. Wait. The wine cough waited 33 years. At 3:45 in the morning, a fire started on the third floor. The cause was never determined. Discarded cigarette, electrical short, spontaneous combustion in stored linens. Something ignited something else. In a building full of combustible materials, the trigger mattered less than the conditions. The fire found the corridor first. Carpet ignited. The flames spread in both directions, following the open hallways toward both ends of the floor. Wooden door frames caught fire. Paint on the walls bubbled and burned. The smoke rose, following the central stairwell toward the upper floors. Most guests were asleep. The wine cough housed 280 guests that night. Families, businessmen, a high school glee club from Tennessee staying for a competition. All unaware that fire was erasing their paths to safety. The smoke reached the upper floors before the flames. It filled corridors, seeped under doors, entered rooms through ventilation ducts. People woke coughing, smelled burning, opened their doors to investigate, saw smoke so thick they couldn't see 5 feet ahead. The central stairwell became a chimney. Heat and smoke rose through it with tremendous force. The stairwell was the only interior route from upper floors to ground level. Within 20 minutes, it was completely impassable. Anyone still on floors above the third had no way down. Guests retreated to their rooms. They stuffed towels under doors, opened windows, shouted for help. Atlanta's fire department arrived quickly, but their tallest ladder reached only to the 8th floor. 7 floors of guests remained beyond reach. Firefighters attempted to enter the stairwell from the ground floor. The smoke drove them back. They wore no breathing apparatus. Their equipment couldn't handle the heat and toxic fumes. They positioned ladder, trucks, extended aerials, began rescuing people from lower floors. On the upper floors, desperation set in. The rooms filled with smoke. Heat from fires on lower floors rose through the walls. Windows cracked from the temperature. Guests faced a choice they shouldn't have had to make. Burn or jump. They jumped. Bodies fell from the 15th floor, the 14th, the 13th. Some aimed for firefighter nets. Most missed. The nets were designed for people jumping from 3 or 4 stories, not 15. The force of a body falling 150 feet tore through the canvas. Even when the nets caught someone, the impact often proved fatal. Others improvised. They tore sheets into strips and tied them together, created ropes, tied one end to bed frames, climbed out windows. The makeshift ropes weren't long enough. They reached down 1 floor, maybe 2. People climbed down and dangled from the bottom, then dropped. Broken legs, broken backs, survival. Some people helped each other. A man on the 10th floor caught people climbing down from the 11th. He guided their feet to his window ledge, helped them into his room, then out his door to a stairwell that firefighters had cleared. He saved 6 people before the smoke forced him to close his window. A woman on the 12th floor lowered her 2 children out the window on a bedsheet rope. Neighbors on the 11th floor caught them, pulled them inside. The woman had no way to follow. She jumped. She died. Her children survived. The fire burned for 4 hours. Firefighters brought it under control, floor by floor. By dawn, the flames were out. But the death toll kept rising as crews searched the building. 119 people died, most from jumping, many from smoke inhalation. Some trapped in rooms, their bodies found curled in corners or lying in bathtubs filled with water. The investigation was swift and damning. The wine cough violated no building codes. It met every requirement that existed in 1913. But those requirements were inadequate, fatally inadequate. The hotel had operated legally for 33 years while being fundamentally unsafe. That revealed the core problem. The law allowed danger. Profit demanded beauty. Safety remained optional until people died. This time, the response was different. The Weinkauf fire couldn't be dismissed as an unfortunate accident. 119 deaths couldn't be explained away with technical language about unforeseen circumstances. The hotel had been a trap. Everyone could see it. Everyone understood why. Within weeks, cities across America began emergency inspections of existing hotels. Thousands of buildings were found lacking adequate fire safety measures. Orders were issued for immediate upgrades, sprinkler systems, fire alarms, emergency lighting, fire escapes, improvements that should have been made decades earlier. Retrofit costs were enormous. Installing sprinklers in a 15-story hotel cost between $50,000 and $150,000. Many hotel owners claimed they couldn't afford it. Some closed rather than upgrade. Others delayed. But public pressure and legal liability forced compliance. The National Fire Protection Association created new standards, requirements that applied retroactively. No more grandfathering, no more exemptions for existing buildings. If a hotel couldn't meet modern safety standards, it couldn't operate. The era of the Grand Hotel was ending, not because they stopped being profitable, because they couldn't be made safe without destroying what made them grand. The open lobbies needed compartmentalization. The hidden staircases needed to be widened and fireproofed. The decorative woodwork needed to be removed. The aesthetic that defined them had to die so the buildings could live. Some owners chose preservation over safety. They converted hotels to offices or apartments where fire codes were less stringent. Others demolished their buildings entirely. The economics no longer worked. A grand hotel that met modern safety standards cost too much to build and maintain while competing against newer, more efficient properties. The Weinkauf itself was rebuilt and reopened. Fire escapes were added, sprinklers installed throughout, fire doors on every floor, alarm systems connected to the fire department. It operated for decades as a moderately successful hotel, then as a residential building. The grandeur was gone, but people could sleep there without wondering if they would wake up. The equation had finally been solved. Beauty without safety equals death. And America decided, after thousands of deaths, that the price was too high. The price of prestige. For the architects, the prize was always clear: the biggest and most spectacular structure in the city. Architecture in the Gilded Age was a blood sport. Firms competed for commissions worth millions. Reputations were built on single projects. An architect who designed a famous hotel could name their price for the next 20 years. One who designed a failure might never work again. The pressure to create something extraordinary was immense. Clients didn't want competent. They wanted transcendent. They wanted buildings that would appear in newspapers. That would attract attention from Paris and London. That would prove American wealth and sophistication rivaled Europe's oldest money. Stanford White understood this better than anyone. His firm, McKim, Mead, and White, designed some of the era's most celebrated buildings: Madison Square Garden in New York, the Boston Public Library, university buildings, private mansions for the Vanderbilts and Whitneys, and hotels. Always more hotels. White's approach was theatrical. He believed a building should tell a story, should create an experience, should transport visitors to another world. When he designed a hotel, he wasn't creating a place to sleep. He was building a stage set for the theater of wealth. The Kiwi. Results were spectacular. Soaring atriums, spiral staircases that seemed to defy gravity, glass domes that filled spaces with colored light. Everywhere you looked, detail. Everywhere you turned, beauty. But beauty at what cost? White's buildings used the latest structural techniques. Steel frames allowed large open spaces. Elevators made upper floors practical. Central heating eliminated the need for fireplaces in every room. The technology enabled the grandeur. Yet safety technology lagged behind. Or rather, it was deliberately excluded. White and his contemporaries treated fire protection as an afterthought, something to be handled by engineers after the important design work was complete. By then, the aesthetic had been established. Any safety feature that conflicted with the vision was rejected or minimized. A hotel White designed in New York in 1894 included a proposal for a comprehensive sprinkler system. The client approved the budget. But when White saw the pipe layout, he objected. The sprinkler heads would be visible in the ballroom. They would disrupt the ceiling's visual rhythm. He demanded they be removed from that space. The engineers argued. The ballroom was one of the highest risk areas. Large crowds, candles and gas lighting, fabric decorations. If a fire started there, it would spread quickly. The sprinklers were essential. White was unmoved. The ballroom was the hotel's showpiece, the space where reputations would be made, where wealthy patrons would hold their events. It had to be perfect, and perfect meant no visible pipes. The sprinklers were removed from the ballroom. The hotel opened to rave reviews. The ballroom was photographed for architectural journals. 2 years later, a fire started during a wedding reception. The ballroom was destroyed. 3 people died. White expressed sorrow, but he didn't change his approach. The next hotel he designed had the same issue, and the one after that, because the clients demanded beauty. And beauty in that era meant concealment of anything that reminded people they occupied a machine rather than a palace. Other architects faced similar pressures. Daniel Burnham designed hotels in Chicago with fire safety in mind. But clients pushed back on features they considered unsightly. Burnham compromised. He included fire escapes but made them minimal. He installed fire doors but specified they remain open during normal operation. He designed egress routes but allowed decorative furniture to partially block them. The compromises seemed reasonable at the time. Nobody wanted to create a dangerous building, but nobody wanted to sacrifice the aesthetic either. So they split the difference. And splitting the difference between safety and beauty meant buildings that were neither fully safe nor as beautiful as they could have been. Architects knew the risks. Private letters and professional journals from the era show they discussed fire safety regularly. They debated sprinkler systems. They shared information about new fire-resistant materials. They studied fires in other buildings and tried to learn from them. But learning wasn't the same as changing. The economic incentives rewarded those who gave clients what they wanted. And clients wanted buildings that looked like palaces, not firehouses. Architects who insisted on comprehensive safety measures lost commissions to competitors willing to be more flexible. The American Institute of Architects established guidelines in 1908. Recommendations for fire safety in large buildings, minimum corridor widths, maximum distances to exits, requirements for fire-resistant materials in certain applications. The guidelines were voluntary. No enforcement mechanism, no penalties for non-compliance, just suggestions. Most architects ignored them, not out of malice, out of practicality. Following the guidelines would have meant buildings that cost more, took longer to construct, and looked less impressive than competitors. In a field where reputation meant everything, that was professional suicide. The price of prestige was paid by those who had no say in its pursuit. The hotel guests. The people who trusted that a building approved by city officials and designed by famous architects must be safe. They paid with their lives when that trust proved misplaced. By the 1940s, the architectural profession began to reckon with its legacy. Younger architects looked at the disasters of the previous decades and asked uncomfortable questions. How many of those deaths were preventable? How many resulted from choices made in pursuit of beauty rather than safety? How much responsibility did architects bear for prioritizing aesthetics over life? The answers were damning. Architects had been complicit, not uniquely guilty. The hotel owners bore responsibility. The corrupt inspectors bore responsibility. The politicians who weakened codes bore responsibility. But architects were part of the system that killed people in the name of luxury. The profession changed slowly. Architecture schools began teaching fire safety as a core subject rather than an elective. Professional organizations created mandatory standards. State licensing boards required demonstration of safety knowledge. Insurance companies insisted on certain features before providing coverage. But the grand hotels of the Gilded Age were already built. They stood as monuments to an era when prestige mattered more than people. When the biggest and most spectacular mattered more than the safest and most sensible. When architects competed to create beauty without counting the cost, and the cost was always measured in the same currency, human life, exposing the flames. It wasn't just the guests who were in danger. It was the public's entire understanding of what safety even meant. The fires created a pattern: disaster, investigation, promises, nothing, then another disaster. The cycle repeated with predictable regularity. But gradually, something changed. Journalists began connecting the dots. In 1911, Herbert Croly wrote an article for Architectural Record examining hotel fires over the previous decade. He compiled statistics: 23 major hotel fires between 1901 and 1910, 417 deaths, millions in property damage. He analyzed the causes, found the same issues appearing repeatedly: no sprinklers, inadequate exits, combustible interior materials, locked doors, blocked corridors. But Croly went further. He investigated why these conditions persisted. He interviewed building inspectors, reviewed inspection reports, examined the relationship between hotel owners and city officials. What he found was systematic corruption. Building inspectors received payments from hotel owners averaging $200 to $500 per year. Fire marshals accepted similar amounts. The payments weren't bribes in the traditional sense. Nobody discussed ignoring specific violations. Instead, inspectors simply avoided looking too closely. They filed reports listing minimal issues. They provided enough documentation to protect themselves legally while ensuring their patrons faced no real consequences. Croly's article created controversy. Hotel industry representatives attacked him, called him sensationalist, accused him of exaggerating isolated problems, but other journalists picked up the thread. Progressive-era reformers saw hotel fire safety as another example of wealth corrupting government. Muckrakers investigated, published exposés, named names. The Kansas City Star ran a series in 1913 detailing fire safety violations in every major hotel in the city. 13 properties, over 3,000 rooms. Not one met the city's own code requirements. the newspaper published photographs, showed blocked fire exits, highlighted combustible materials, listed violations in detail. The articles prompted an investigation by the city council. The investigation found that hotel owners had made collective contributions totaling $8,000 to council members' election campaigns the previous year. Not illegal, but sufficient to ensure code enforcement remained lax. Public pressure forced action. The city hired new inspectors, passed stricter codes, established real penalties for violations. Within 2 years, most hotels had upgraded their safety systems. The improvements cost owners between $5,000 and $20,000 per property. Expensive, but far less than rebuilding after a fire. The pattern spread to other cities. Local newspapers investigated their own hotel industries, found similar problems, published similar exposés, created similar public pressure. City by city, the scrutiny increased. The hotel industry fought back. Trade associations hired publicists, issued statements claiming hotels were safer than private homes, accused journalists of bias and sensationalism, threatened lawsuits. But the strategy backfired. The defensive crouch made them look guilty. The public sided with the journalists. Insurance companies played a crucial role. They had financial incentive to reduce fire losses. Insurers began requiring safety inspections before issuing policies. Hotels that failed inspections faced dramatically higher premiums or couldn't get coverage at all. The inspections were thorough. Insurance engineers checked sprinkler systems, tested fire alarms, measured corridor widths, counted exits, reviewed building plans. Their reports became leverage for reformers. A hotel owner might ignore a newspaper article, but they couldn't ignore insurance requirements. Some hotels couldn't afford the upgrades. They closed. Others converted to different uses where safety requirements were less stringent. The market was solving the problem that regulation had failed to address. An unsafe hotel was becoming financially unviable, but progress was uneven. Large hotels in major cities faced intense scrutiny. Smaller properties in less visible markets continued operating with minimal oversight. Rural hotels and those in towns without aggressive newspapers often escaped attention entirely. The divide created its own tragedy. People died in small-town hotel fires that would have been prevented by reforms already implemented in major cities. The safety revolution was happening, but not everywhere at once. Whistleblowers emerged from within the industry. Hotel employees who had witnessed dangerous conditions spoke to journalists. Engineers who had compromised their standards under pressure from owners came forward with documentation. Even some architects admitted they had prioritized beauty over safety in past projects. These confessions were devastating. They confirmed what reformers had argued. The problem wasn't ignorance. Everyone knew hotels were dangerous. They just hadn't cared enough to fix it until public pressure made inaction untenable. The federal government eventually stepped in. The 1947 Hotel Safety Act required basic fire protection in all hotels with more than 20 rooms. Federal buildings and facilities had to meet stringent standards. Interstate commerce gave Congress jurisdiction to impose requirements on hotels serving travelers from multiple states. The law created a baseline. States could exceed it, but not fall below it. For the first time, minimum safety standards applied nationwide. The hotel industry initially opposed the law, complained about costs, predicted widespread closures, but compliance proved less expensive than feared. Most improvements could be phased in over time, and the market was already moving toward higher standards anyway. By 1950, the transformation was largely complete. Hotels built after World War II included comprehensive fire protection as standard. Existing hotels had mostly been upgraded or closed. The era of the death trap, Grand Hotel, was over. But the exposés had revealed something beyond the specific issue of hotel fires. They showed how wealth could corrupt safety, how industries could capture regulators, how public interest could be subordinated to private profit. The lessons extended far beyond hotels. Journalists had proven their power to effect change. Investigative reporting created accountability where official oversight had failed. The muckraking tradition established in the progressive era became a permanent feature of American journalism. And hotel fires became a case study in why that tradition mattered. The flames had exposed more than structural failures. They had exposed moral failures. Failures of responsibility, of integrity, of basic human decency. And in exposing them, journalists had helped end an era of preventable death. The aftermath of ashes. After the flames died down, the question remained: could this be a turning point, or was it simply another fleeting moment of outrage? The reforms of the 1940s and 50s were real. Building codes tightened, enforcement improved. Hotels installed sprinklers and fire alarms. Death tolls declined. The statistics proved the progress. Major hotel fires killed an average of 43 people per year in the 1930s. By the 1960s, that number had dropped to fewer than 10. But memory is short, especially institutional memory. By the 1970s, complacency was creeping back. Not to the extremes of the Gilded Age, but the vigilance was fading. Maintenance was deferred. Inspections became cursory. Fire drills were skipped. The systems designed to prevent disaster still existed. They just weren't being maintained with the urgency that had created them. In 1980, the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas caught fire. 85 people died. The hotel had been built in 1973. It met all applicable codes, but the codes had loopholes. Sprinklers were required only in certain areas. The casino floor wasn't one of them. Fire doors existed, but weren't properly maintained. Alarm systems worked, but weren't audible in all locations. The fire revealed that compliance with code was necessary, but not sufficient. The code itself needed continuous updating. Technology changed, materials changed, building uses changed. The regulations had to keep pace, or they became outdated permission to be unsafe. After the MGM Grand, another wave of reform swept the industry. Sprinkler requirements expanded, alarm standards improved, fire-resistant materials became mandatory in more applications. The changes were significant, but they were reactive, responding to a tragedy rather than preventing one. The pattern from the Gilded Age hadn't disappeared. It had just slowed down. The cycle of disaster and reform continued. Each tragedy prompted improvements, but the improvements were always incremental, always responding to the last fire rather than anticipating the next one. The fundamental tension remained unresolved. Safety costs money, beauty costs money. When budgets are limited, something gets compromised. And despite all the reforms, safety was still often the compromise. Not as dramatically as in the 19th century, but still. The pressure to reduce costs meant pressure to minimize safety expenses. Modern hotels include fire protection systems that would have seemed like science fiction in 1900. Automatic sprinklers that detect heat and release water. Smoke detectors that trigger alarms throughout the building. Emergency lighting that activates when power fails. Fire doors that close automatically. Elevator systems that return to the ground floor during emergencies. Public address systems that provide evacuation instructions. All of this technology works when maintained, when tested, when taken seriously. But maintenance is expensive, testing is time-consuming, and the incentive to cut corners persists. An owner might defer replacing sprinkler heads, might postpone testing the alarm system, might skip a fire drill. Each individual decision seems minor. Together, they recreate the conditions that killed people a century ago. Regulatory enforcement is better than it was, but it's still inconsistent. Major urban hotels face frequent inspections. Smaller properties in less visible markets may go years between visits from fire marshals. Budget cuts reduce inspector staff. Political pressure protects influential owners. The system has improved, but hasn't been perfected. The public's attention is the ultimate enforcer. When a tragedy occurs, people demand action. Politicians respond. Laws pass. Budgets increase. Enforcement intensifies. But as memory fades, so does urgency. Budgets get cut. Regulations get relaxed. The cycle begins again. This isn't unique to hotels. It's a pattern across industries and regulatory domains. Environmental protection, workplace safety, food quality, financial regulation. The same cycle appears everywhere. Disaster provokes reform. Reform reduces incidents. Reduced incidents decrease public attention. Decreased attention enables backsliding. Eventually, another disaster occurs. Breaking the cycle requires sustained commitment. It requires recognition that safety isn't a problem you solve once. It's a practice you maintain forever. The hotels that learned this lesson survive. Those that forgot repeat history. Some modern hotel chains have made safety a core value. They exceed code requirements. They invest in redundant systems. They train staff extensively. They conduct regular drills. For them, safety isn't a compliance issue. It's a competitive advantage. Families choose their properties because they feel secure there. Business travelers select them for the same reason, but other hotels do the minimum. Meet the letter of the law, check the boxes, hope nothing goes wrong. And usually, nothing does. Modern fire protection is good enough that even minimal compliance prevents most disasters, but not all. The occasional fire still kills people. And when investigators examine the wreckage, they usually find the same pattern. Code compliance in theory, maintenance failures in practice. The legacy of the Gilded Age hotels is complex. They created an aesthetic standard that still influences design today. The grand lobby, the elegant ballroom, the luxurious suite. These concepts originated in that era. Modern hotels emulate them, but with a crucial difference. Modern hotels recognize that beauty and safety aren't opposites. They're complementary. A truly elegant space is one where guests can relax completely, where they never worry about danger, where the building protects them invisibly. That was the insight the Gilded Age missed. They thought safety was ugly, that protection required industrial aesthetics, that you had to choose between elegance and security. They were wrong. But it took thousands of deaths to prove it. The aftermath of ashes left a transformed industry. Hotels that survived learned to build differently. Owners who rebuilt did so with safety first. Architects who continued practicing adopted new principles. The change was real and lasting. But it wasn't automatic. It required constant effort, constant vigilance, constant willingness to spend money on features that guests would never notice because they prevented problems that never occurred. The question wasn't whether the turning point had arrived. It was whether each generation would choose to sustain it. So far, mostly yes. But the history warns against complacency. The flames are always waiting for negligence to provide fuel. Learning from the wreckage. The fires had burned away the facade, but what lessons remained from the ashes of so much destruction? The most obvious lesson seemed to be about building codes. After the major fires of the early 20th century, regulations multiplied. By 1950, a typical city building code was 300 pages long. It specified materials, methods, dimensions, and systems in exhaustive detail. The code told builders exactly what they could and couldn't do. But comprehensive codes weren't the real lesson. Cuba had detailed building codes in 1900. They were simply ignored. Italy had fire safety regulations in 1890. Enforcement was non-existent. Laws on paper mean nothing without systems to ensure compliance. The real lesson was about accountability, about creating conditions where following the rules was cheaper and easier than breaking them, where violations had consequences serious enough to matter, where public scrutiny made cutting corners too risky. Insurance companies understood this better than governments. They created incentive structures that made safety profitable. Hotels with good fire protection paid lower premiums. Those with poor systems paid more or couldn't get coverage. The market enforced what regulations often couldn't. Insurance ratings became a powerful tool. The National Board of Fire Underwriters conducted detailed inspections of buildings. They assigned ratings based on fire protection quality. Cities with good fire departments got better ratings. Buildings with sprinklers got discounts. The ratings influenced premiums across entire regions. Suddenly, mayors cared about fire department funding because it affected every building owner's insurance costs. The system wasn't perfect, but it aligned incentives. Hotel owners who invested in safety saved money over time. Those who didn't paid a surcharge. The invisible hand of the market nudged behavior towards safety in ways that regulatory enforcement alone never could. Technology played a role too. As fire protection systems became more sophisticated, they became harder to ignore or circumvent. Early sprinkler systems required manual activation. Someone had to turn a valve. That meant someone might not be there when fire started. Automatic sprinklers eliminated human error. They activated based on heat. No decision required. No opportunity for negligence. Smoke detectors evolved similarly. Early systems relied on people noticing smoke and pulling alarms. Human perception varied. People slept through danger. Automatic detection systems removed that variable. Sensors triggered alarms when smoke appeared, regardless of whether anyone noticed. The technology created reliability that human systems couldn't match. But technology had limits. Systems failed. Components wore out. Batteries died. Sprinkler heads corroded. The lesson wasn't just to install systems, it was to maintain them, to test them regularly, to treat them as critical infrastructure rather than set and forget installations. The hotel industry developed maintenance protocols, quarterly inspections of fire protection equipment, annual testing of alarm systems, regular replacement of smoke detectors. These weren't just good practices, they became requirements. Insurance companies demanded maintenance records. Regulators checked them during inspections. Liability lawyers subpoenaed them after fires. The documentation created accountability. An owner couldn't claim they didn't know about a problem if maintenance logs showed repeated failures. A manufacturer couldn't deny defects if testing records demonstrated consistent malfunctions. The paper trail made responsibility clear. Another lesson involved training. Fire protection systems only work if people know how to use them. Staff needed training on evacuation procedures, on how to use fire extinguishers, on when to activate alarms. Regular drills ensured everyone knew their role during emergencies. Hotels developed comprehensive training programs. New employees received fire safety orientation during onboarding. Annual refresher training kept knowledge current. Fire drills tested both systems and people. The drills weren't just exercises. They were opportunities to identify problems before real emergencies occurred. Guests needed education too. Fire safety information in every room, evacuation maps on doors, instructions for emergency procedures. Hotels learned to make this information prominent and clear, not hidden in a drawer or printed in tiny text. Large maps, simple instructions, multiple languages. The lesson extended beyond technical measures. Culture mattered. Organizations that treated safety as a core value had better outcomes than those that treated it as a compliance obligation. When leadership emphasized protection, staff followed through. When management cut corners, everyone else did too. Creating safety culture required constant effort. It meant celebrating successes when fires were prevented, analyzing near misses to learn from them, rewarding employees who identified hazards, making clear that safety concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. The cultural elements were harder to mandate than sprinkler systems, but they were just as important. The wreckage taught one final lesson: that prevention is invisible, that success means nothing happens, that the best fire safety system is one you never need to use. And that creates a paradox. How do you value something whose benefit is the absence of disaster? The Gilded Age couldn't answer that question. They couldn't see the value in spending money to prevent fires that might never occur. They wanted visible luxury, not invisible protection. And so they died by the dozens when the invisible protection wasn't there. Modern hotel operators learned to value the invisible, to invest in systems that might never be used, to maintain equipment that might never activate, to train staff for emergencies that might never happen. Because the alternative, as history proved repeatedly, was catastrophic. The lessons from the wreckage weren't complex. They were simple. Build safely, maintain diligently, train thoroughly, inspect regularly, respond quickly. The challenge wasn't understanding what to do. It was committing to do it consistently, even when the immediate incentives pulled in other directions. The ghosts of the Gilded Age. The grand hotels of the Gilded Age are mostly gone now, but their ghostly influence lingers in the cities they once dominated. Stand on Fifth Avenue in New York, where the Windsor Hotel once stood. You'll see a modern office tower, glass and steel, utterly unlike the ornate palace that occupied the site in 1873. But look closely at the streetscape. Notice the sidewalk width, the setback from the street, the placement of the building relative to its neighbors. These elements echo the Windsor's footprint. The physical buildings vanished, but they shaped the urban landscape in ways that persist. Property lines were established. Street widths were determined. Infrastructure was built to serve them. When the hotels disappeared, their shadows remained, influencing everything built afterward. Walk through downtown Chicago. The block where the Iroquois Theater stood is now occupied by a modern building. But the alley beside it, the one where people jumped to their deaths in 1903, is still there, still narrow, still dark. It serves no functional purpose anymore. It exists because it was there when the theater was built. Urban geography is path-dependent. Early decisions constrain later options. The Windsor, the Iroquois, the Winecoff, the Palace, dozens of others. Most Americans have never heard these names. The buildings that created them are gone. The people who built them are forgotten. But their influence persists in ways most people never recognize. Modern hotel design still references Gilded Age aesthetics. The Grand Lobby is a direct descendant of Windsor's marble entrance hall. The ballroom with crystal chandeliers echoes the palace's public spaces. The luxury suite maintains the spatial organization developed in 1880s New York. The vocabulary of elegance was established then. It's been refined and updated, but the core concepts remain. The difference is that modern hotels separate the aesthetic from the structure. The Grand Lobby now sits within a fireproof frame. The ballroom includes sprinklers hidden above a false ceiling. The luxury suite has fire-rated walls and doors that close automatically during emergencies. The beauty is maintained, the danger is eliminated, or at least minimized. Some historic hotels survived through adaptive reuse. Buildings too important to demolish but too expensive to operate as hotels became office buildings, apartments, or mixed-use developments. The conversions required extensive modifications, but they preserved the facades, maintained the public spaces, kept the architectural heritage visible even as the function changed. The Brown Palace in Denver, opened in 1892, still operates as a hotel, but it's been rebuilt twice. The original interior was gutted and replaced with modern systems. The exterior looks much as it did in the 19th century. Inside, almost nothing is original except the spatial layout. It's a ship of Theseus, the same hotel in name and location, completely different in substance. That pattern repeated across America. Historic hotels that survive today are mostly reconstructions. The name continues, the site persists, but the actual building that carried that name in 1900 is gone, replaced by something that looks similar but functions entirely differently. The ghosts haunt regulatory systems too. Building codes are written in reaction to disasters. Every section has a history. Every requirement emerged from someone's death. Modern fire codes are encyclopedias of tragedy. Each specification represents a lesson learned through loss. The requirement for fire doors in corridor walls, established after the wine cough. The mandate for automatic sprinklers in high-rise buildings, created after the MGM Grand. The rules about exit signs and emergency lighting, written after. Dozens of smaller disasters where people died trying to find their way out in darkness and smoke. Reading building codes with historical awareness is like reading a memorial. Behind every technical specification is a story of suffering. The code is a monument to all the people who died, teaching us what we should have known already. The economic legacy is complex. The Gilded Age hotel boom created enormous wealth. Fortunes were made in real estate development, construction, furnishings, and operations. But fortunes were also destroyed in fires and bankruptcies. The net effect is impossible to calculate, but the redistribution was significant. Insurance companies grew powerful, partly by managing hotel fire risk. Construction firms specialized in fire-resistant materials. Sprinkler manufacturers built entire industries. Safety consultants created a professional practice. The disaster generated economic activity. Not the kind anyone would choose, but activity nonetheless. Cities changed, too. The grand hotels had been anchors of downtown districts. When they burned or closed, the surrounding areas often declined. The hotels had generated foot traffic, employed hundreds of people, attracted other businesses. Their absence created voids that took decades to fill. Some cities never recovered their pre-fire vitality. The hotel had been the crown jewel. When it disappeared, the neighborhood lost its defining feature. Business moved elsewhere. Property values declined. The ghost wasn't just architectural, it was economic and social. But other cities adapted. They built new hotels that learned from past mistakes. They created safer, more sustainable urban centers. The fires cleared space for modernization. Painful as it was, the destruction enabled transformation that might not have occurred otherwise. The deepest legacy is psychological. The Gilded Age represented a moment of supreme confidence. Americans believed they could build anything, achieve anything, that wealth and ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. The hotel fires revealed limits to that confidence. They proved that hubris kills, that beauty without wisdom leads to tragedy. That lesson transcended hotels. It applied to everything America attempted in the 20th century: industrial projects, urban development, foreign policy, technological advancement. The memory of burning hotels whispered caution, reminded people that progress requires more than ambition. It requires humility, foresight, willingness to learn from failure. The ghosts of the Gilded Age hotels are educational ghosts. They don't haunt to frighten, they haunt to remind, to ensure we don't repeat their mistakes, to keep visible the cost of choosing beauty over safety, profit over protection, image over integrity. As long as we remember them, they serve their purpose. The danger is forgetting, letting the lessons fade, assuming that because we've solved this problem, we can ignore the principles that solved it. The ghosts exist to prevent that forgetting. And so they linger, invisible but present, in the cities they once dominated. What we lost, what we learned. In the embers of the most opulent tragedies, we found not only our failures, but our future. The grand hotels of the Gilded Age were more than buildings. They were dreams made tangible. They represented American ambition at its most audacious, the belief that anything was possible, that wealth could create perfection, that beauty could be achieved without compromise. We lost those dreams when the hotels burned, not just the physical structures, the psychological confidence they represented, the certainty that we knew what we were doing, that our judgment was sound, that success was inevitable. 3,021 people died in hotel fires between 1903 and 1946. Each one was a person with a name, a family, plans for tomorrow. They checked into hotels expecting safety, expecting that the grand facade guaranteed protection. They were wrong. Their deaths proved something uncomfortable, that beauty can deceive, that wealth can blind, that the appearance of quality means nothing if the substance is flawed. The most expensive, most prestigious, most beautiful hotels in America were also death traps. The contradiction was stark and undeniable. What we learned emerged slowly. First came the technical lessons. Fire spreads fast. Smoke kills before flames. Exits must be abundant, accessible, and adequate. Materials matter. Systems must be redundant. Maintenance is essential. These lessons seem obvious now. They weren't obvious when the Windsor opened in 1873. We learned that codes without enforcement are useless, that regulation without accountability is theater, that voluntary compliance is an oxymoron. The market won't solve safety problems on its own. It requires pressure from insurance companies, from journalists, from lawsuits, from public outrage. The pressure must be sustained or it fades. We learned that culture matters as much as code, that organizations prioritizing safety achieve it, that those treating safety as a checkbox don't, that the attitude of leadership cascades through the entire enterprise. A hotel owner who cuts corners on fire protection probably cuts corners everywhere. The safety failures signal broader integrity failures. We learned that invisible infrastructure is the most important kind, that the systems you never see are what keep you alive. that sprinkler pipes hidden above ceilings matter more than crystal chandeliers below them, that emergency exits concealed behind exit signs provide more real luxury than silk wallpaper. The Gilded Age couldn't see this. They valued only what was visible, what impressed, what could be photographed and envied. We learned that disaster is predictable, not the specific date or location, but the general pattern. When you build hundreds of buildings with the same flaws, some will fail. When you ignore warnings, tragedy follows. When you prioritize profit over people, people die. These aren't surprises, they're consequences. But we also learned that change is possible, that industries can transform, that behavior can be modified. The hotel sector in 1920 looked nothing like it had in 1890. Better materials, better systems, better oversight, better outcomes. The transformation wasn't accidental. It resulted from sustained pressure and committed reform. The question is whether the lessons persist, whether each generation rediscovers them or learns from history. The evidence is mixed. Some lessons seem permanently embedded. Modern hotels include fire protection as standard. Nobody argues against sprinklers anymore. That battle is won. Other lessons fade. Maintenance vigilance declines. Enforcement budgets shrink. Public attention moves to newer concerns. The cycle of complacency returns, not to Gilded Age levels, but enough to worry those who remember why the reforms mattered. The ultimate lesson is about values, about what we prioritize. The Gilded Age chose beauty over safety. They made that choice explicitly, consciously, with full knowledge of the risks. They decided the risks were worth it, that prestige justified danger, that appearing wealthy mattered more than being safe. They were wrong. But their error wasn't unique to hotels or to that era. The same choice appears in countless contexts: industries that externalize safety costs, products that sacrifice user protection for aesthetics, services that prioritize convenience over security. Every time the choice appears, the Gilded Age hotels provide a reference, a reminder of what happens when we choose wrong. We lost magnificent buildings in those fires, architectural treasures that will never be replicated. We lost lives that should never have been endangered. We lost confidence in institutions that should have protected people. The losses were real and permanent, but we gained something too: wisdom, humility, recognition that beauty without safety is a trap, that grandeur without integrity is a facade, that wealth without responsibility is a curse. These insights didn't come cheap, but they came. The grand hotels of the Gilded Age are gone, but their legacy remains. Every time a smoke detector activates, they're remembered. Every time a sprinkler system prevents a fire from spreading, they're honored. Every time someone evacuates safely through a well-marked exit, their sacrifice has meaning. The buildings burned, but the lessons survived. And if we remember them, if we apply them, if we refuse to repeat the mistakes, then perhaps the thousands who died in burning hotels didn't die in vain. Perhaps their tragedy purchased our safety. Perhaps the price, terrible as it was, secured a future where beauty and safety coexist. That was the dream worth building. Not the gilded palaces that killed their guests, but the modern hotels where families sleep soundly, where travelers feel secure, where luxury means comprehensive protection as much as elegant design. The Gilded Age couldn't achieve that dream, but we can, we have, and as long as we remember why, we'll keep it alive. The embers have cooled, the ruins have been cleared, new buildings stand where the old ones burned, but the memory persists, the warning endures, and the lesson, hard won and dearly bought, remains. Beauty is worthless if it costs lives. True luxury is safety. And the only palace worth building is one everyone can walk out of alive.